Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Peggy Smedley Show. As always, I'm your host, Peggy Smedley. On today's show, we're talking about and asking some very tough AI questions. Who pays for its impact? Who and how are we going to tax it? Who's liable when it fails, when it hits the workforce hardest? When we think about safety, what's happening in practice, and what happens when innovation outruns governance? Have you all thought about that? These are some really important questions. How do we make AI truly useful? We've been talking about AI for a very long time, but these are some very important questions I think we need to address. My guest here today is a leading researcher who has spent his entire career studying what happens when technology outpaces the rules meant to govern it. And these are really important questions. But for automated vehicles to AI, he understands the trade-offs. So before I belabor the introduction any further, let me please welcome Bryan Reimer, who's a research scientist at MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Peggy, thanks for having me.
You know, Bryan, I was really thinking about this, and you and I have had some earlier discussions to prep for this interview, and I was really impressed that you are serious about this conversation. And I know everybody talks about AI and everybody talks about the importance, but you and I were talking about a bigger conversation. And I think it's important to say who pays for AI's footprint. And I think that's an important conversation that we really need to address. So maybe you and I could start with our conversation right there and really dive into that, because I think there's a lot to unpack there. So why don't you and I start there?
Peggy, it's a great topic. I think that we forget that AI today may be as much of a transformation in society as electricity was many years ago. Today, it really feels like it's almost weightless. But the footprint of this technology or set of tools is physical, social, institutional. While today, much of what we see being deployed is privately funded, the risks and costs are already spilling into public systems. Even if the upsides are only private, the downsides are public. We're thinking about impacts on everything from energy systems to water, data centers developing, chips, stock market valuations, impacts on labor, cybersecurity, workforce disruptions that may be something that was unimaginable not so many years ago. These are just not abstract numbers. These really need to be fully counted as we try to value who pays for AI's footprint. As it becomes a critical infrastructure, we really need to be thinking about infrastructure level responsibilities. To me, the maintenance and oversight and accountability of what we're building for AI is much more like the power grid, water supply systems, or the internet state highway system. Very structural, very important as we develop and devise this technology forward. Public responsibility here should not be public subsidy for private risk taking. We see some companies right now that are taking enormous risks in the development of this technology, and that's great. But we as taxpayers shouldn't be publicly subsidizing that. We should be thinking about how do we build the governance, not waiting for an AI Superfund site before asking who should have paid for the prevention. Now, if the gains are private, the cleanup really can't be public.
It's such an important point, and I think we can't skip that discussion. You have to have these guardrails that you're talking about in place, and guardrails are critical at every level of the conversation. And we have to say, if we're talking about public infrastructure, we're talking about oversight, safeguards, all of those things that you're talking about, should it be taxed like labor, like capital, or something entirely different or new? Those are the things that I think overwhelm us, because we're sitting there saying, what should this look like? And if you really ask any company who are involved in AI or trying to understand for their enterprise, I don't think anybody really knows. We're all saying we have to do it. But what exactly that looks like, I don't think most companies have an answer.
I don't think anybody has an answer. This is why we have public elected officials. I wrote in an op-ed a couple of weeks ago the need for public discourse around automated vehicles. And the same is true for the taxation issues. If AI changes how value is created, public revenue is going to have to follow that value stream. AI substitutes for human work, but replaces the revenue streams that we tax labor. I'm not convinced that, as some have talked about, a simple robo-tax is the answer. It's catchy, but quite frankly, too blunt to be thinking about. We need something maybe closer to taxing the enabled value, perhaps a VAT style mechanism, excess profit tax, computer data center footprint taxes, capital gains taxes, something. But this is what public officials need to be debating. We're wrestling with today's budget problems, but we need to think about how we're going to fill these issues and address these issues in the future. Some of the generated funding that we should be looking for today is to pay for the workforce transitions, the education, the infrastructure. I think cybersecurity issues are a large and potentially underfunded topic in this day and age. And yes, perhaps if we do it all right, potentially using this as a way to fund some of the debt reduction that we really need. I don't look at this as a goal to punish the AI investments, to punish the companies that are building this. This is the goal to really begin to think about how does the tax base need to shift with a fundamental technological change that is as big as the invention of electricity.
So let's think about this, because when you think about how do we look at taxes, we're all talking about robots. Are they going to be the ones? Are we going to make people say, I'm dating myself, Hazel, or whoever, Rosie the robot, whatever it might be that we put names on it, or whatever these kind of creature movies that we see. What obligations then, if we think about these large corporations, do AI developers have to ensure against systemic failures or even success? There's so much when we think about infrastructure. In our minds, we think about infrastructure like our bridges, our roads, and all of these things. But if we start talking about autonomous anything, now we're talking about a much bigger thing in the way we want to do things. And that's comes into our infrastructure. And we know there's a lot of moving parts, no pun intended, as we talk about these things. Yeah. But those are the things we have to think about. We can't just say we're going to steamroll forward without taking a step back, going back to those guardrails that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think the guardrails are so important. And again, it's not that I think we can slow down at all. It's the fact that we have obligations that we need to think about as a society to win here. If AI can fail at scale, the responsibility must scale there too. Look, we see this in automated driving. As you mentioned, I've spent a lot of time in my career focused on driving safety. In the last decade or so, studying automated driving systems as they pour AI out into human supervised systems on the road and robotaxis. Look, we're seeing in many places of the world right now where failures of AI-enabled systems are disrupting emergency responses, building risks in school zones, changing accessibility issues, public service, and quite frankly, demanding more of our infrastructure. Apologies and litigation are really not a substitute for a reasonable governance model. So as we begin to deploy AI into these consequential areas, we have to look to the organizations that are evolving this technology and say, okay, you need to stand behind these technologies financially. How do we look at this? Look, low stakes consumer applications are one thing, but AI's use in transportation, healthcare, finance, hiring, public service, and other critical infrastructure is just something else. The public should not become the insurer of last resort here. If you're going to look at reaping the benefits of this and you're going to invest capital, the developers there need to be taking responsibility. Now, what does that look like? Is that insurance? Is that bonding? Is that reserves? Is that protections for liability? These are where public officials need to be talking. Insurance is not just about paying claims. It's a market test to say, can we price this risk into a product? And quite frankly, in many senses today, the answer is no. And if that's the answer, that's what should be pushed down on the market. This is an uninsurable risk, and we should be talking about that. A company says an AI system is ready for the real world, it should be really ready to carry that real world responsibility forward as well, not just throw that out to the public space.
We've been talking about these kind of things for a long time, but now we've seen this exponential growth, and we're all excited about saying, oh, this is all going to happen. But then those risks are there. They're right there. And then we say, who's going to be responsible? So at the same time, we're saying it's going to replace jobs. And then people say, no, we're going to have humans in the loop. But then if there's a problem, it now comes down to how do we account for workforce impact and who bears that burden so that you just described? Because then in my mind, it says, okay, we've taken away some people. We've put people in other jobs, but then at the same time, there's job loss, there's job failure, there's job risk, there's job opportunity. It's a lot of the yin and the yang. And I think, again, we're at this moment in time that we have to be looking at what does this mean before we just say we move forward. Do we have the answers? And how, I guess I'm asking two questions, and I apologize for this, is how does safe AI mean in practice? Because we're talking about both things, because we're saying the human in the loop is going to be with AI, and yet at the same time, there's those risks and rewards at the same time that we have to address. We can't skip a strategy here. And I think I want to know, are we doing that?
So I think their safety workforce impacts are highly related here. I think, but let's just talk about the workforce side first. I feel sorry for the youth of today who are just starting their careers or trying to figure out what to major in college, because there's so many unknowns out there of what the labor pool is going to be demanded
Well,
of
let me
in the
stop
future.
you there. Let me stop you there. There's opportunity, though. Not just feel
Absolutely.
sorry. We have to look at it's an exciting time because they could be the creators of almost anything. Just like you said, electricity. We don't know what the opportunity because it's exciting.
Absolutely. But the question is, what should I major in? And I'm going to throw 100 or 200 or 300 or $400,000 on education that I got to make a decision now when how to evaluate those opportunities look like. That's evolving. Is we're talking about here. The question is not simply whether AI takes jobs. It's which jobs from where, from whom, and under what terms. What do we augment? Who's displaced? Who's devalued? Okay. But the reality is AI is going to create new jobs too. Those jobs are not going to be the same. They're not going to require the same skills. Okay. They're going to be available to some of the people who were displaced, but they're going to be available to people who reinvent themselves. I think that's why we got to be thinking about more than reskilling as a slogan. It has to be more about investing time, access, employer commitment to really think about what these jobs want to become on the other end. So the real question is not whether AI makes workers more capable or simply makes labor cheaper. It's what do these productivity gains look like? And how do we reinvest in the training, judgment, oversight, creativity, expertise that are really needed to work effectively with an AI-enabled systems? What does the future labor pool need to look like? I think the companies who really capture the productivity gains also are going to have to capture the transition costs, and the ones who invest in their labor pools are the ones who are going to come back out in the end, because those labor pools offer something that AI doesn't: insight and judgment. So we remove the burden of the people with less power, we have risk. But we begin to invest in the labor pool, invest in the populace, we can change the trajectory of this technology forward. But that brings us to the whole safety piece. Safe AI does not mean risk-free AI. Okay. The safe approach from an economic perspective, from an employment perspective, is not necessarily easy. We can't define that right now. But it also means we got to be thinking about what is governable risks. The challenge is that AI can reduce some risks and it's going to create new ones, that often automation AI creates less understood risks. So the system can improve one metric, but create a vulnerability in another. This is why we can't think about just accuracy, speed, or benchmarking performance in isolations. We need to be thinking about this much more holistically. We need, most importantly, not to just think about how did I prove risk or safety prior to deployment, but what does that look like over the year or 2 or 3 or decade after launch, as the humans who interact with these technologies are changing along the way? So safe AI really means human oversight, accountability, incident reporting, auditing, how this is changing the workforce, safety on the roads, and even beyond as it's unfolding in real life. It's not a one-time certification. It's a continual process improvement that we need to be thinking about, talking about, and iterating forward from.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, Bryan, this is what's interesting. Are we really saying we have to look at the steps along the way? We have to reduce some of those risks, but how do we evaluate then? In my mind, I'm sitting there and I'm hearing you right now and I'm saying, how do we evaluate AI systems and improve the outcomes while trying to reduce or worsen those others? Because I'm seeing the bigger picture. I've been at these events. I'm hearing what everybody's preaching, what they're espousing as being the next best thing. But at the same time, you're just saying the future of work is feeling the pressure. They're saying, what's my job? I've got to spend all this money. But there is a lot of excitement there. But yet there's this safety issue we have to think about. But yet there's these risks. I guess it's back to the risk and reward. How do we look at these systems in a bigger holistic way and say, I guess I'll go back to my question. How do we evaluate the systems that improve some of those outcomes while worsening other ones? Because if we don't address that, we're back to square one.
I think the biggest piece is going in eyes wide open and getting away from the marketing slogans that AI is going to solve the world. To me, AI should be judged by the full ledger of benefits.
Wait a minute, I got to stop you. You don't think AI is going to solve all our problems?
Absolutely not. Come on. It's going to create, as we talked about, create new ones, but we got to move beyond looking at the highlight reel. We got to get deep here. We got to be willing to talk about how systems may boost productivity, but so they also accelerate lots of other things. That's misinformation we see in social networks today. That's work slop, that when we're just asking the AI prompt to do things and we're not even reading it. That's the energy use problem and what that may mean for society at large. And back to the workforce disruptions we talked about. So we need to stop asking only, does it work? How good's this technology? How cool? What does the marketing hype sound like? We need to be asking, what else does this change at the same time? We need to be really thinking about the full picture of the enormous benefits, the costs, and the risks. And this is why policy is so important. We need to be thinking about who benefits, who pays, and who's responsible if some harms go wrong. Like a story I just heard about a local high school moving from our typing of essays back to pen and paper. Why? A full realization that if we want to teach students how to write, we need to move away from a keyboard where everything is AI enhanced today. Productivity matters, but productivity is not the same as progress, and trade-offs are not just technical, they're value judgments, and we're not having that value judgment conversation. That's not to any way demean the incredible potential of this technology, but we have the opportunity to judge and hone where we want that impact to be. So it's not the question of whether AI just improves one metric. It's the question of where the hidden costs are and where the real value is over time. I think it's important to remember, we can't really continue to look at AI from the highlight reel, from the short YouTube or TikTok clips. We need to be thinking about what it truly impacts. What gets better? What gets worse? Who benefits? Who pays? And what happens if we can't correct course when something goes wrong? And I think that some of the leaders here, Anthropic, and the arguments with the Department of War around really the use of autonomous lethal weapons and use of AI around surveillance are really right in there, trying to make sure we don't move to a point where something turns out to be too wrong. So I think there's some people thinking here, but we're not having that public, transparent conversation we need to be.
First of all, if you see high schools going back to teaching our children, being able to put a signature down, handwrite, that is super important because we can't rely everything on just our computers because we all know the internet goes down, we're all in trouble, right? We've seen it already. So I think that's a powerful statement. Kudos to that high school because that is a critical step in the right direction. Sometimes we got to go back to go forward. But I guess there's a really important point you make there because I think we have to look at this. I've been saying with a lot of my guests on the show right now, the horse has left the barn or the train has left the station because when we look at AI, I don't know, how do we slow innovation? Can we slow down adoption? That's a problem, I think, at this point because other countries China is really doing things fast. So we have to compete. We have to be better. What tools will policymakers, as you just said, realistically have to either compete or we can't slow down? And the problem that we look at this point is what do we do? Is AI going to continue to be so much that we've invested in? Where is it right? Where is it wrong? This is a big problem, yet opportunity. Again, it's a challenge. Again, we'll go back to the guardrails. We'll go back to protecting our society from what we already have done with AI, and where is AI with LLMs and what it's going to do for our society to be good or bad. These are questions that you're asking, and yet I don't know that we have the answers for.
I don't think anybody has the answers. Look, I think LLMs are just a fad. Deep neural networks were a decade ago. What's next? Some people talk about world models, but I think we don't know what this revolution is going to look like. And again, or evolution, depending on how we frame it. Look, we can't put AI back in the lab. It's embedded in way too much from an application.
Can't put the genie back in the bottle or the toothpaste back
genie's
too.
This genie's not going back. at this point, as much of a geopolitical competition as it is a corporate one. As you mentioned, China. If we were to slow down AI investments in the US, the Chinese are going to race past us. I think it's very risk. It becomes a political hot potato, much like electric vehicles
So
were.
let me ask you that. You mentioned defense. Is that our biggest concern, that from a defense perspective, we are going to be in more trouble? That if we don't do it, because now it weakens our ability to defend ourselves from a global
Absolutely.
perspective.
Look at some of the rumors and the risks around Anthropic's newest model and the risk of cyber terrorism. The speed at which we are going to see zero-day threats is exploding. Some of my colleagues, I advise AI Sweden labs in National AI Center in Sweden, and some of the work that just came out of there, just looking at the zero-day threat risk here, it's huge. So I think that as we look here, we need to really be questioning where deployments move from experimentation to something that's more conditional. So it's great. We're experimenting with AI all over the place. And if we don't experiment with it, we're not going to find the true value of this technology. But when it moves from, quite frank, experimentation and lab studies to the real world, policymakers do have tools that need to be in play here. And I do not think we're using these tools as adequately as we should. Transparency requirements, audit procedure rules, third-party liability assessments, privacy protections. Look, we see the race in automated vehicles out there. Baidu had some issues in China the other week, and the Chinese government stopped issuing permits to investigate. Waymo had issues in California, and it was looked the other way, and they're running on after the power system failures, switching around. Governments just can't be enforced from the outside. It needs to be collaboratively built with the stakeholders. The folks who really understand this technology the best are the ones who are creating it. We can't bolt governance on after the fact, but at the end of the day, organizations building this technology need to have some political responsibility to be talking transparently, openly, and collaboratively with the folks who need to build the guardrails, not legislation. I think guardrails are the right word because we don't know where it's going to go next. We got to be looking for win-win collaborative solutions that enhance our ability to succeed, not letting the market figure this out. That's going to lead to a lot of risk long-term that I don't think people really want to be on. So in other words, we need to figure out how to pave the road while we're already driving on it. And that's something hard for policy.
Exactly. And that's the conversation. You can't have an infrastructure that you don't have the right protection. So what happens when innovation outpaces governance? That leads to that question.
Yeah. And when governance arrives too late, the public end up paying twice or maybe even more. First, you pay for this development once, then you pay for the risk.
Wait, that's a safety, a risk question right there. That's instantly what happens.
Absolutely. But the most important thing that the public pays for, again, is the investment in rebuilding trust and the time and delay that occurs as we build trust in technologies. Automated vehicles are a great example here. Pilots in California and Arizona became more public infrastructure here. And what we're watching, as I mentioned earlier, emergency response issues, remote support overseas, accountability that becomes unavoidable. Okay, what are we risking? Public trust in technologies that can reshape how we live and move sooner. If something goes wrong, people want to know who had the data, who made the decision, who was accountable, and why didn't we understand visibility this before?
Oh my gosh, I'm going to go crazy right now. You just said the thing that I keep telling companies, and I want to advise companies over and over. It's about the data. Doesn't matter what you create. You always have to have the right data. If you don't have good data and you're not looking at data, it doesn't matter what you create. It's all about the data.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's not whether the technology works most of the time. It's whether the public believes the right people are accountable. I don't care if a technology fails. If we learn from it, we build from it, no one gets greatly harmed, that means we're learning. We learn more from failure than we do from success. We're human.
Exactly. So we get so lost in the technology concept, we forget it's about the data that gets us there. So should governments then, that leads then to this really important question, should they be fast movers or fast followers? Because then that gets to where the data gives them the best information to make the best decisions, knowing how do we have risk or reward based on all of that.
Yeah, and it's all about being fast follower because technologies do not scale on capacity. They really scale at the end of the day in trust. And again, governance is so important to trust. Governments need to be smart movers, not first and foremost. The first folks to develop new governance takes investment, takes talent, takes visibility into a problem, takes excitement, but also brings liabilities, political blowback, operational risks, and exposure before we can even write rules that are mature. So I think we got to get out of the confusion of being innovation friendly and governance light. I think we need to be thinking about focusing on the important attributes of where we need to employ governance to make sure the innovations work. When are we piloting technology? When are we quietly letting these sparsely governed systems become too much a part of public life? Let's go back to the topic I talked about earlier, automated vehicles. Arizona and California carried much of the heavy early load and early burden. Other communities should be learning from that experience, not repeating it, open up broader boundaries than we learned in California didn't work. Fast followers here can be the smart followers. They can scale with much better safeguards, much smarter guardrails. I think borrowing from a stepwise approval mindset, much like we think about the FDA approving drugs, you got to demonstrate you can walk in a safe environment before you're allowed to run, before you're allowed to scale at view. But most importantly, then comes the need for independent review, clear thresholds, and accountability over the long term. Being first is not the same as being ready to deploy. And I think that's something that the AI and automation developers really need to think about. Just because we think this technology is ready to test on the real road, ready to give to consumers, have we dotted our I's and crossed our T's across the ecosystem?
You and I both know that I'm one that says we have to do a lot to prevent distracted driving. And we focus so much blowback on so many things. We don't recognize that there's so much more we have to do. And I think there's a lot of good intentions here. And I think with that, but we have to do something that ensures AI aligns with long-term societal goals. I almost feel that's the same thing we have to do with protecting people's lives. They drive from distracted driving and all of these things. What are your thoughts with all of that I'm just talking about?
Absolutely synergistic. For one, we talked about, and it's probably another half hour, 45-minute conversation. Look, we've been beating the dead horse with distracted driving research for years. I think we got to take, much like AI, we got to take a step back and a step up to look at these problems from a societal perspective. Distracted driving is the outcome of an attention epidemic to me. Driving is boring. What do we do when we're bored? We find something else to do. So we got to attack the attention side of it. In AI here, we're thinking about building technology. No, we're building societal systems. AI is not going to align with society by accident. It's going to follow the incentives we give it. If the incentives are all about making money, AI is going to try to figure out how do we make more money. Right now, these incentives are being largely set by corporations, focusing on engagement, getting us to use this stuff. Speed of decisions, cost reduction, consumption. These are dominant incentives. We shouldn't be surprised that AI accelerates misinformation, inequalities, manipulative behaviors, even waste. So alignment is not only a technical problem, it's an institutional and economic one, and quite frankly, perhaps most importantly, a political one. We need to ask, what is AI being optimized to do? Who benefits, who pays, and what else could get worse as this scales? Markets show we have demand, but they don't automatically protect the public value. And that's something I think we need to be talking more and more about. This is why governance matters so much. It's not saying stop innovation, but it's making sure that public value is part of that optimization function. Tools exist here. I mentioned earlier, transparency audits, review periods. Look, the ability to modify or stop a deployment when trade-offs become unacceptable. Look, the FDA has probably been the best in the business around this. We learn, we make decisions based upon what is the best information at the time, and we correct if that wasn't the right decision. And quite frankly, using the expertise of others to evaluate these systems on the fly is an important guardrail. These guardrails need to be adaptive and not frozen in time. So AI should just not move us faster. It should move in a direction that's truly worth going, one that really provides value and utility to us as a populace and a human race at large.
I'm going to go back to data. Data gives us insights. With insights, we can fail fast, course correct. So what's the current bellwether then for AI governance, if we look at that then?
That's a really good question. I think we look at it one side, the EU AI Act is a legal bellwether. But I think you look at it from the other side, automated vehicles are the real practical bellwether today. So look, the EU AI Act is an interesting piece of legislation. I think it's shaping risk around the world because it's giving companies a way to think about transparency, accountability, and risk. I think it's impacting many multinationals as they move from the EU to other continents and countries around the world. But AV is where AI governance leaves paper and enters city streets. These are systems and automated driving where emergency responders, infrastructure, pedestrians, workers, law enforcement, and data systems all are relying around public trust today in a safety critical environment that is far different than talking or looking and moving paper. Look, a chatbot tests trust in information. A robo-taxi tests trust in public systems. And I see AI, as we talked about earlier, really moving to being public infrastructure. So automated vehicles are forcing consequential questions every day. Who's accountable? Who gets the data? What level of risk is acceptable? Who pays when things go wrong? Do the public institutions have enough ability to govern before trust breaks? And that's an area I really worry about. I watch what's going on in their driver assistance systems, automated driving systems today. And I worry that one day I'm going to wake up to a phone call from a major media news and it's over because, quite frankly, an accident that we can't ignore is going to stop the system before it really has the ability to provide the public with the value that we really want. So automated vehicles, quite frankly, are no longer separate from this topic of AI governance. The cleanest place where AI governance becomes fundamentally real.
And we have to address it. Again, we're pushing it. We've been talking about connected vehicles for 10 years. And we've been pushing it, talking about, but now as we get to the AV side of this, we're like, wow, this is where everything goes. So do we make AI truly useful? How do we make it truly useful in this whole sense, in the bigger scheme? Talk about, as we wrap up, we're running out of time. What's your final thoughts as we get there?
Look, I think AI starts to be useful as we change the question from capacity to purpose. It's not about the technical, what can we be, what's the next capability we can create? It's what are we doing? So it's not just what can AI do, it's what should AI do, for whom and where. This is the heart of the book that Magnus and I wrote. For me, the key distinction is co-pilot versus autopilot. How do we use AI to augment human capabilities? Hey, how do we make us more capable as opposed to automating everything around us? We live for a reason. We want to experience. We like doing. We like creating. This is a tool that honed correctly can make all that value proposition even better. On the other hand, the value proposition for big tech is automate. That's the fastest revenue stream we can think of. So I think we need to be thinking about where do we want AI to be playing? Where do we want to remove the human? And where do we want to augment the human? AI is most useful today when it handles tedious, repetitive, complex, or overwhelming parts of our lives, leaving us to focus on judgment, creativity, relationship, ethics, responsibility, things that AI really can't handle. It cannot think strategically out of the box. It can reiterate and is incredible at regression to the mean. But truly, AI systems should improve decisions, reduce the friction of life, allow people to live better than they do today. So the benchmark to me should not be novelty. I've watched a lot of cool wow things. It's what's the value? If AI makes people more capable, more informed, better supported, it can be generally truly useful. If it merely makes labor cheaper or shifts responsibility away from humans, quite frankly, we should be more successful. So useful AI is not about removing people from the loop. It's about putting people into better loops.
Yeah, I love that. We have to really look. AI is here. We have to figure out how to implement it into our lives, where it's the best fit, where it's not. But we also have to, I think we go back to our initial conversation, those guardrails, what governance is going to be here. And we have to think about that sooner rather than later. So Bryan, I know you and I are going to continue to have many more conversations because I love having conversations with you. Bryan Reimer, research scientist at MIT Center for Transportation Logistics. Where can our listeners get in touch with you, get your book? Tell us everything we need to know.
Best place is www.bryanreimer.com or look me up on LinkedIn or Google my book, How to Make AI Useful, on Amazon.
Bryan, thank you so much for all your time today.
Peggy, thanks for having me.
All right, listeners, that is all the time we have for the show today. Make sure to share and subscribe to our episodes each week. Share your thoughts with me on X or at Connected World, and follow me on LinkedIn or YouTube and continue the conversation there. Please check out our website at connectedworld.com or show website at thepeggysmedleyshow.com. Remember, we broadcast live every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central, and you can check out our podcast every Thursday. This is the Peggy Smedley Show, your voice for our Connected World.